Okay, good evening, everyone. We're ready to start our shir on Parshat Chayei Sarah, which, of course, the irony of Chayei Sarah is that not only does is her death recorded in this week's Parsha, but Avram Avinu's as well. But we're not going to refer to that. Her death, yes, at the very beginning of this Parsha, we find the death of Sarah Imenu. People ask the question, which we're not going to get into today, but nevertheless, it's one worth asking. What was Sarah Imenu doing in Hebron? And where did Avram Avinu come from upon hearing of her death? Now, probably most people are aware of the Medrash, which says that the Satan came and told Sarah Imenu that that Avram was about to slaughter her son Yitzchak as a korban. Now that's a medrash. It's important to note that's a medrash. And it is not universally accepted that Sarah Imenu died at the time of the Akedah. The Parsha of Chayei Sarah could well, the Parsha of Chayei Sarah could well have occurred long after the right after the Akedah itself. Largely, the reason why Chazal say that the death of Sarah was due to the Akedah is because of, shall we say, the logistical view that post hoc ergo propter hoc, that after this, therefore, because of this, since the death of Sarah Imenu was written in very close proximity to the Akedah. Therefore, some people, the Medrash says that she died from the Akedah because she got the message from the Satan. We're not compelled to accept. And it is important to note that many Rishonim say, you're not compelled to accept every Medrash. First of all, you can't, because some of them are contradictory. And if that's the case, if you accept one, you've automatically not accepted the other. But again, it's perfectly fine, of course, if one wants to say that the Akedah was the proximate cause of Sarah Imenu's death, okay. But Abravanel has a different view. His view is that the death of Sarah Imenu came about after the Akedah, pretty well after the Akedah. And Avram Avinu decides he wants to purchase the Marat HaMachpelah. They spent much of their life, Sarah and Avram Avinu, in Be'er Sheva. Avram Avinu, says Abravanel, did not want to be buried Avram Avinu did not want to be buried in Be'er Sheva. All right, why? Because that was the territory of Avimelech and the Plishtim. Avram Avinu did not want to be buried eternally in the land of the Plishtim. So he sought a grave site, the Marat HaMachpelah, where Adam and Chava were reputed to be buried. And he said, look, Sarah, go and see if you can buy that area at a reasonable price. Abravanel, his theory is that Sarah Imenu, that if Ephron Achiti, who was the proprietor of that particular site, saw Avram Avinu coming, so the price would go up, threefold, fivefold, whatever it would be. So Avram Avinu decided to send Sarah Imenu from Be'er Sheva to Hebron, which was also called at that time Kiryat Arba, to purchase it at some sort of a reasonable price, which would not be jacked up by Avram Avinu's fame. So, of course, Abravanel then also does not see that the death of Sarah Imenu was tied directly to the Akedah. Nobody loses Olam Haba either way, okay, because we weren't there. And it's both of the Midrashim, the Medrash and Abravanel's position are an attempt to understand in the context of the Psukim, what are we talking about? When are we talking about? What's the time frame? But Avram Avinu, of course, sees that Sari Imenu goes to purchase the Marat HaMachpelah, and that's when Hashem decides to take her. And she dies at the age of 127. And therefore, people conclude that the Akedah took place when Yitzchak was 36, 37. Again, all of that is fine, but we will never be able to know exactly. But this brings us now to the issue that we're going to talk about this evening directly, and that is after the burial, and Avram Avinu now has a certain, what we would call menuchat hanefesh. He has a certain sense of tranquility, that he has taken Sarah Imenu and given her not only the kavod that she deserves, but brought her to rest in Eretz Yisrael itself, not in the land of the Plishtim, and he ultimately that will be his final resting place as well. But then he calls Eliezer in, and we really don't know that it's Eliezer. The Torah does not say that Eliezer is the person who was sent on the mission to find a wife for Yitzchak. Now, of course, it says throughout this parsha, ha'eved, and he was Eliezer was, of course, the Zakan Beito. He was the chief operating officer of Avram Avinu's possessions and fortune. So it makes sense that he was a very trustworthy man, a very bright person, and Avram entrusts him with the task of finding a wife for Yitzchak. Now, the problem is, Abravanel asked this, and others ask this: why does Avram Avinu send him to Haran, to what is Aram Naharayim, which means literally between the plain between the two rivers. The two rivers are the Tigris and the Euphrates, or Prat and Chidekel, these two rivers. As a matter of fact, just parenthetically, sometimes it's nice to learn things on the way to learn other things. Al Jazeera, not my favorite publication, but Al Jazeera is Arabic for that which cuts through the two rivers. So that's why they call it Mesopotamia. Meso means between, potamos, which is Latin for rivers. So Mesopotamia, and it's called in Arabic Al Jazeera. Okay, and that's Mesopotamia in Arabic, and Aram Naharayim in Hebrew. So the question that the people ask is, why does he? What does he gain in essence by sending? We're going to call him Eliezer because the Chazal identify him as Eliezer. There's no reason to think that it's not Eliezer, but it is worthy of note that the Torah just says ha'eved, ha'eved, ha'eved. It's just called throughout the servant of Avram. So what is gained by sending him all the way to Aram Naharaim? If it's a matter of Avodah Zarah in Eretz Canaan, there's no shortage of Avodah Zarah in the family of Avram Avinu. After all, Hashem sent Avram Avinu away from the family for that very purpose, so that he can, at least among other things, be free from the influence not only on his family, but in general, the restrictions that would come upon him. So what is that? And if we're talking about the bad acts of the people of Canaan, it doesn't appear that the people of Aram Naharayim are much better. As a matter of course, first of all, when Torah in Vayikra, Parshat Vayikra say, Maaseh Eretz Canaan, and like they do an act in Canaan, you may not engage in those types of practices. That's Canaan, and that's where Avram was living. So the question that we're going to focus on now is, what is the big advantage of sending the Eved Eliezer all the way to to Aram Naharayim. Now, first of all, it's interesting that that in Shmuel Nechama Leibovitz Shalom brings she brings a number of sources who deal with this question, and one of them is this Shadal Shmuel David Lutzato. He says that this was largely a political decision on the part of Avraham. Again, not your standard response, but he says, after all, if Yitzchak marries the Canaanim, it's just going to make it that much harder when we have to chase the Canaanim out, right? Because then we're sending family, we're chasing family out, and so therefore, and of course, you're going to see in today's discussion, of course, family is, as we know, a very, very powerful influence on everyone. So Shmuel David Lutzato says, if indeed Avraham Avinu it gets engaged with them and becomes family with them, how will the Jews later, we know that has to take place, the Jews eventually, when they come back to Eretz Yisrael, are going to have to chase them away. So we will have then been, so to speak, intertwined with the Canaanite family. How can we do it? It's a lot easier to chase somebody you don't know away than somebody with whom you either directly or indirectly have concerns. And so acharei yotam achim, once they get married, they become family. K'moshe lo yitkaru milchama b'Moav, Ammon ve'Edom. The Torah says we're not allowed to attack Ammon, Moab, and Edom, and a lot of it has to do because of the closeness, the close familiar relationship. Now, Nechama says she doesn't particularly like that. Nechama, she said, it doesn't seem that Avraham Avinu, the great Ma'amin B'Hashem, who was promised the land of Eretz Yisrael, and it was promised in the Brit Bein HaBetarim. It was sealed by a Brit. Okay, the Brit Bein HaBetarim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu assures Avraham Avinu that his children or great-grandchildren, fourth generation, will inherit the land, and that means they're going to be children too. Children will inherit the land. So why would Avraham Avinu have to go through all of these machinations to avoid trouble with Canaan? Hashem promised it. You don't have to worry about it. So that's what she said. She said it doesn't seem so logical that would be the driving force with Avraham Avinu. But there are others, not to engage with the people of Canaan. Now, there are others who say that, and the Ran is one, and the Ketav Kabbalah is another. They both say, you know what? You have to make a difference between people's deeds, let's say corrupt deeds, and corrupt philosophical worship. They're not the same. And this is actually the Ran, a Rishon, who says it. Later, I found it also in the Ketav Kabbalah, who lived 150 years ago, the Akotzi Mecklenburg. They both say as follows: when it comes to character, personality traits become inherited. Right? So if there is, now again, and this is sort of pseudoscience. I don't know whether we have the data to back that up, but shall we say, just in terms of observation and anecdotal understanding, if we know that there are two parents or a parent who is violent, and of course it could be certainly could be a trait which is inherited, whether it's a mental illness or other things. Those things sometimes are inherited, and so therefore I'm going to read what the Ran says. Okay, that in fact. These traits are, well, better, I think it's clear in the Ketav Kabbalah. So let's take him. Here we go. The Ketav Kabbalah makes the following statement. He says, it is true. He says, in reality, Lavan and Betuel, to which the Eved was sent to that area, the Mishpacha of Avram Avinu, Imeyotam of the Elohim. It's true. They worshipped idols. Ein min hamechuyav sheyavor rishumam livneihem. It's not inherited. In other words, how philosophically one feels about God. Does God exist? Do many gods exist? Those things are not inherited traits. Personality disorders or personality, whether one is more inclined to violence, more inclined to other elements of how they conduct their daily lives through action, he said that can be inherited. Okay, so he says, if it's a matter purely of theology, a matter of belief and faith, that's not passed down. It could be, could be nurtured, but it's not biologically passed down. Ki emunah hakozevet lo ta'aseh roshem, that a false emunah, false belief, is not going to lo ta'aseh roshem rak benefit. That only applies to the way one's spirituality is, but that can change. Okay, it's not rooted in the person's physical, biological being, and it doesn't necessarily, says the Ketav Kabbalah, and again, he and the Ran agree, it doesn't necessarily pass down to children. In other words, you could do it, but it's not part of the person's being. Lachein bacharu ha'avot bivnot betuel. Therefore, since the problem with Betuel and Avram Avinu's family in Mesopotamia was largely one of theology, that they're under their belief in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, their pagan beliefs, those can be uprooted. But essentially, they were not violent or having traits which could be passed down to the children. That's the Ketav Kabbalah's view. It's also the Ran's. Now, so far we have the Shadal's view that it was a political decision on the part of Avram. Don't get mixed up with these people, because eventually you're going to have to, not right away, down the road, 400 years or 300 years, but what's going to happen is we're going to have to chase them out, hard to chase family out. And Nechama Leibovitz said, no, it's unlikely. Avram Avinu doesn't go through that type of process on something that was promised to him by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Then we have, of course, the idea that emunah is something which is not passed down. Since it's not, the pagan beliefs of the family in Mesopotamia and Aram Naharayan, those will not be, they're not genetic, and therefore they won't be passed down, and so they can be uprooted. But the family itself was refined. Basically, the family was refined. Because of that, Avram Avinu decided that he wants to have a relationship with the family through marriage. Okay, now Rav Hirsch. Rav Hirsch, that's how had a very, very interesting view. This is, I think, so clever, so bright. He said, Avram Avinu is looking to marry into a family. True, you marry the girl, but the family comes with it. So he said, it's like this. If Yitzchak marries someone from Canaan, where they are, what's going to happen? She has family. They all live there. So the in-laws are going to have a profound impact upon the life of Yitzchak and Rivka and any children that they have. Whereas, if Yitzchak marries someone who came from Mesopotamia, Aram Naharaim, and she's brought to Eretz Canaan, she's not going to naturally affiliate with the people who are there. She doesn't even know the brother doesn't even speak the same language. Yitzchak was brought up not to associate with them. Brilliant. So that's why he said, go there. Not because they were better necessarily, but because there will be less negative interaction and less of an environmental negative imposition upon the family. Well, so that in itself is, I think, such a brilliant understanding of a person who lived in Germany throughout the 19th century. Rav Hirsch was born in 1808, and he was nifter in 1888. So he lived 80 marvelous years in which he impacted the Jewish and the general community, because he was the Rav of Frankfurt, and he was a very powerful influence. So he said, and of course, he's talking about Yitzchak and Rivka. And I often say that, the stories about Yitzchak and Rivka, Avram and Sarah, Cain and Hevel, it's true. It's to teach us about them. But more importantly, it's to teach us about us, where we live. And the people who surround us will affect our children, and as well as us. But even if we think we can avoid any negative repercussions, it can affect the children. And so therefore, Avram Avinu looked ahead. He said, it's better they should live alone, not completely alone, not completely isolated, but and then they can choose their friend. Can't choose your family. So if she were in Aram Naharaim, certainly Yitzchak wouldn't be good for him. Besides, the land of Eretz Yisrael was given to Avram, and Yitzchak never left Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so he's not going to go there. So you bring a person back from here. You have two choices. You bring a person back from the family that number one, that they are refined, and number two, she will not have to interact, won't want to necessarily interact much with Knaanim. Okay, now Rabbi Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik says again, Rabbi Yoshe Ber, the contemplative, brooding personality, and I say that with respect. He was by his own definition. Rabbi Yoshe Ber said he really didn't have a lot of friends. He was very kind, very generous. We learned that from his parents, from his grandfather and grandmother, I'm sure, as well. But we have a homiletical discourse here on why Avram Avinu saw hospitality as the key, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu saw hospitality as the key component in what he wanted to inculcate with Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu was a natural when it came to hospitality. We talked about that in the Esha last week, right? That it was to he used it as a vehicle to reach people who he was hosting. But Rabbi Yoshe Ber says as follows: there are three reasons for singling out Hasnasat Orshim. There are three reasons for choosing as the central virtue of Avram Avinu. Sorry about that. Works better in pink. All right. So there are three reasons, Rabbi Yoshe Ber said, for singling out Hasnasat Orshim. One, he says, hospitality is difficult and uncomfortable. Okay? And therefore, we allow a stranger into our home. His mannerisms are odd. His speech is foreign. It's interesting that Rabbi Yoshe Ber was a great observer of people. And he eats differently and can be crude and vulgar. His opinions are strange, and he intrudes upon the privacy of the family. Avraham built altars and invited everyone to his tent, no matter how vulgar the guests or how difficult it is. So that's number one. Number two, says Rabbi Yoshe Ber, the second central experience of Abraham's life was Galut, okay? That he was a wanderer. Avram Avinu went from Ur Kasdim to Haran, and then he went to Shem and Beit El, and then he went to Mitzrayim, and he came back. and then he was in Beersheba, so many different places. The central experience of Avram's life was galut, homelessness, wandering without knowing the destination, sleeping on the ground on freezing cold nights, being lost along the byways of a strange land. This intense experience taught Avraham and his descendants that an involvement of sharing in distress, of feeling for the stranger and compassion for the other, it is as much as possible. This trained Avraham to react quickly in the presence of suffering. No matter who the stranger was, what he stood for, or how primitive he was, the stranger had suffered. Suffering purges person and redeems. So that's the second reason that hospitality becomes a hallmark of Avraham Avinu's life. And thirdly, for the supremacy of the norm of hospitality is that the Torah rejects the doctrine of my home is my castle. What do we mean by my home is my castle? It insulates us. I don't have to let anybody in that I don't want in. So whether it be a mishulach or whether it be somebody who is what Chazal called over petachim, a person who due to his dire economic situation must go house to house. So we understand that, and also through, of course, the mitzvah of Sukkah, we understand that number one, there's a transitory nature to life in general, and that this person who is poor and coming to our house, or he's a person who is coming on behalf of worthy institutions, he's willing, he moves from place to place to place, and the shall we say Maaseh Avot Siman Labanim, Avraham Avinu's travail and his movement from one place to another, that taught him to teach his children. And of course, Hashem says himself that I know that he's going to teach his children la'asot tzedakah or mishpat, tzedakah both in terms of righteousness and of course charity. All right, so he will do that, but that's because ingrained in Avraham Avinu, and then to Yitzchak, and then to Yaakov, and their children and their families, and so it is passed on, is the idea of the transitory nature of life, and therefore the need to be hospitable. So that's what Rabbi Yoshe Ber says. And we're going to conclude now with one more piece. One of the great figures of Chicago Jewry in the early and mid 20th century was Rabbi Menachem B. Sachs. Rabbi Menachem B. Sachs, actually, his wife was Hannah Sachs, Aleh Shalom, and Rabbi Sachs, I had the great zechut of knowing him, not real well, but knowing him enough to say this was a powerful, magnetic personality. Nobody is that memorable, especially if you're 40, 50 years younger than Rabbi Sachs was, but he would see me, and he had moved away from Chicago. He would remember who I was. Not all that memorable. People are memorable, but the fact is he just had this quality about him. And he was one of the founders of the ATT. He dealt with Federation. He worked with them and created a true Kehila concept. Now, he writes as follows. This is one of my favorites. Avraham Avinu says, when he talks to Eliezer, he says to him, Lo tikach isha livni mi benot haKnani. Don't take a woman from the Canaan. Right? And then he says, Asher anochi yoshe b'kirbo, which I live in his midst. An unusual phrase, because he could say, don't take from the Canaanim. What is this Asher? First of all, everybody knows where he lived. They were in Eretz Canaan. Asher anochi yoshe b'kirbo. Go back to my land and to my birthplace and my family. That's where you go. Now here, watch carefully at how Rav Sachs, who was a marvelous darsh, he wrote a number of svarim, but one of them is called Menachem Tzion. It comes in 2 volumes, Perush and Chumash, and he says as follows. Here's how he interprets it. Don't take a woman from from the families of Canaan, the daughters, which Anochi Yoshe Bekirbo. Anochi, by the way, means what? I. He's not talking, according to Menachem Sachs, he says, he's not talking about himself. He's saying, Anochi, the Midah, or the way of looking at the world, always centered around Anochi. He said, what do I see about the Canaanites? The Canaanites have no sense of hospitality. They have no sense of concern for the welfare of the others, or no say ba'ol chavero, or to take. They don't have it. Asher anochi yoshev. Every person's central idea is anochi. And by the way, in modern Hebrew, he mentions it too. We have the word anochiut. That's egotism, anochiut. Only concerned about. So Avram Avinu, whose whole life was dedicated to the klal, to the unfortunate, to the misfits, to all kinds of people, he said, I don't want anybody from here. Why? Because Anochi, idea of me and me alone, that it dwells in their midst. I want to conclude though. Kadosh Baruch Hu is also called Anochi. Anochi Hashem Elokecha. And Chazal talk about the idea of Anochi. So this word Anochi could either be one of the most unpleasant aspects of the human personality, or we could replicate HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Anochi of Anochi Hashem Elokecha, and the Anochi of Hashem who cares for all human beings. It's up to us how we want to interpret our individual Anochi, whether it is Anochi, I and I alone, or is it Anochi, I who am Tselem Elokim, whom HaKadosh Baruch Hu has bestowed with the traits of HaKadosh. So we'll wish everybody a wonderful Shabbat Shalom. Hope everybody is well, and Bezrat Hashem, we'll see you next week.
Okay, have a good week.
Michael.
Thank you, Rabbi Myers.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
My pleasure, everybody. Good Shabbos to all.
Thank you. You too. Have a good Shabbos.
Yes, thank you for coming.